Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of BattleTech Aces Quick Strikes. And if you can't tell from the scene here, we're going to be talking about combat this time. And this is another video by request. Someone wanted to talk a little bit more about combat because there are some interesting situations that can come up. They're not as common as the movement ones that seem to perplex us all the time, but in combat, there can be some situations that are a little bit tricky. So I've set up a map here with some physical combat, with a destroy objective, and a weird one, but two units that have identical point values, identical TMMs, identical amounts of armor, and identical medium damage, I think. I'll verify. But very, very similar units. And what does the Aces side do when that happens? So those will be all the things we're going to cover here in this episode of Quick Strikes. All right, so here's the map we're going to be working with for this episode. I'm going to focus on page 20 of the rulebook, which talks about combat exceptions. And these are the most interesting things, I think, that come up during combat, because normally when you pull a card, the instructions are fairly straightforward. So for example, for this brawler, you're just going to look at its targeting zones. You're going to try to find a target in there, and then you'll use the red command list to break that tie. And most of the time, when you're done with that, you're going to have one single target for that unit to attack. Now, there are some exceptions, and that's what we'll be going through. But for the most part, I think finding the target is relatively straightforward. So I'm going to kind of go through this part and talk about destroy objectives, which I may have beaten to death at this point, indirect attacks, which might be the same thing, but I'll just show you very quickly what you do in those situations. And then physical attacks, which I haven't talked too much about, but this actually came up in one of my campaign missions where right at the end, I had a situation where my unit was within physical attack range, and I kind of forgot about these rules and I didn't do the right thing. So I'm not going to necessarily do these in order. I think I'm going to start with physical attacks, but this is generally what I'm going to cover here. All right, let's start off here. So we have this Loki in the woods with this Victor, and we're going to talk about physical attacks and what the Aces do for this. Now, in general, the Aces are going to avoid physical attacks in almost all cases. And that kind of fits with the clan theme where clanners find that dishonorable, so they wouldn't want to do it. But here are the exceptions. If the Aces card specifically tells it to do that, or the sortie special rules tell it to use a physical attack. Now, I've used, I think at this point, almost all of the Aces cards and have done almost all of the sorties. Now, I've read through some of the sortie rules. I've never seen anything that said for units to prioritize physical attacks, and I don't think I've really seen them on Aces cards except for the infantry, which will tell to do an anti-mech attack. But I suppose there are some ways that could come up on the cards. Maybe I've missed them, or maybe it's going to be in future boxes. But that's one exception where that would take place. The second one is what's relevant here. We have the Victor in base-to-base contact with that Loki. So it says if the unit's preferred target is in base-to-base contact, which it is right here, then the only way to attack it is to make a physical attack. So if it chooses the Victor, it's going to use a physical attack. So let me bring up an example card. So if we pulled this card, if we look at the range zones, it's looking out 6 inches first. And that's the only thing that's within 6 inches, the Victor. Nothing else is within 6 inches. So in this situation, because the Victor's in base-to-base contact with the Loki will use a physical attack for combat. It cannot make a weapon attack. It wants the Victor, so it will use a physical attack. All right, let's move back a little bit and let's take a look at a different card for the same deck, the Brawler deck. So for this one, the range zone is 24 inches. It's not looking within 6 inches now. So it has more units as an option for it to attack. So its priorities are going to be to hit the target's rear, which it can't do for any of the targets on the map right now. So it's going to go to the yellow command list. So we're going to pull up our command card and we're going to go through the yellow list. It wants the most armor, which is going to be the Victor, which has 7, and this Warhammer, which also has 7. Next, it's going to look at medium damage. Both of them have 4 for medium damage. I'll show you the cards. Same armor, same medium damage. So finally, it's going to go to the lowest TMM. And if we look at these units, the Victor has a 2 TMM currently, and that's what you're looking for, current TMM. So it has a 2 because it jumped. The Warhammer only has a 1. So in this situation, it will attack the Warhammer. It will not go for the physical attack because its preferred target is not in base-to-base contact, so it will attack the Warhammer. All right, now we're going to look at a slightly more complicated example. Now the Victor is not in base-to-base contact, but it is within an inch. So it's in melee or physical attack range. So there's a couple different things that can happen here, but the automated unit is going to think about using a physical attack, but only in certain situations. So let's just say we're going to pull up the original Brawler card that I showed, and it's going to start with a range zone of 6 inches. So the only thing within 6 inches is that Victor. Now it has an option of using a weapon attack or a physical attack. There are three situations where it will decide to use the physical attack. The first is if its physical attack would do more damage than its weapon attack. So at short range, this Hellbringer normally does 4, but let's say in this mission it's already taken damage and it's taken 2 weapon hits. So it's only doing 2 damage at short range now, but its size is 3. So it would do more from a physical attack than it would from a short range weapon attack. So in that case, it will choose the physical attack. Let's talk about a similar situation. This time the Hellbringer has not taken any weapon hits, but it has taken a fire control hit. So I marked it with that gray dice. That means it's going to prioritize the physical attack because the fire control hit is going to make its target number for weapon attacks worse. So in this situation, it will again prioritize the physical attack. Okay, last situation, I've marked it with an orange dice because it has 1 heat. So at some point during the sortie, it has overheated by 1. And in this situation, it will again choose the physical attack because it has heat. So it will use this opportunity to deal damage through a physical attack and cool down. And one important thing to keep in mind with all of this is that the Aces units will only use the physical or melee attack. They will never use a charge or death from above attack unless a specific Aces card, a command card, or the sortie rules tells you to do that. Again, I don't think there's anything like that in this box, but I think they're leaving those rules open for future boxes. All right, now we're going to look at a weird situation that's come up a couple of times for me during my campaign. And I changed the map up a little bit. I moved this destroy objective, the Pegasus hover tank, up a little bit, and the Victor now has used ground movement instead of jumping. We're going to take a look at the Stormcrow down here in the woods, and we're going to pull up its card on the skirmisher deck. So its range zone is looking out 24 inches. Now that gives it access to everything on the map. The only thing it can't see is the destroy objective, conveniently for my example. It really can look at anything on the board except for that. So it's going to try to hit a target's rear, which it can't do. None of these units are positioned in a way that it could attack and get that extra damage for being in the rear of the unit. So now it's going to go down to the red command list. So I'll pull up the command card. And if we look at the red list, we're going to prioritize a destroy objective. Well, wouldn't you know it? That Pegasus is behind the hill and the Stormcrow can't see it. So then it's going to go for the lowest TMM. So that's going to be either the Victor or the Warhammer, which both have a 1. Next, it will go to the lowest armor. Well, we're going to say nothing has taken any damage so far, so the Warhammer and the Victor have the exact same number of armor points, 7 each. Finally, it's going to go to which unit has the highest point value. Well, guess what? They both have exactly the same point value. They both have 40. These units are so similar. So when this happens and you can't break the tie using the filters on the combat card, the final filter would be the unit that is the physically closest. So we're going to look at what is closest to the Stormcrow. I'll get the tape measure out, but I think it's pretty obvious. The Warhammer is about 11 inches away, and the Victor is about 15 inches away. So in this case, even though these two are tied on all the filters on the command card, the Stormcrow is going to target the Warhammer. Now let's say that on this turn, the Warhawk has attacked the Warhammer and destroyed it. So now the Stormcrow is selecting the Warhammer, but that unit's already been destroyed. It hasn't attacked yet, though, so it's staying on the map. In that situation, it's going to go back to the identified target step, and it's going to pick the Victor this time, so it would end up attacking the Victor. That probably seems obvious, but it's just important to mention that if a unit is destroyed, the Aces aren't going to target it anymore, even if that's the one that comes up on its filter. Okay, and as one final similar example, let's say that this Stormcrow has been overheating a lot. It's up to a 3 overheat. And that Pegasus is way up there. And let's just say for whatever reason it wants to attack the Pegasus. Probably wouldn't happen with this setup, but let's just say it wanted to. When it calculates its target number, let's say it has a skill of 3. So it'd be 3 plus 3 for the heat, so that's 6. It's going to fire through woods for a 7. That has a TMM of 3, so that's a 10. And then it has long range, so that's going to be a 14 to hit. If it's a 14, it's obviously not going to attack that target. It's impossible to make that attack. So it will again go back to the identified target step and pick a different target. All right, and now one that, like I said, I've kind of beaten a dead horse here on this a little bit in my videos, but I think it's still important to mention that. Let's say you're playing a mission and you do have a destroy objective. In this case, it's a Pegasus. Let's just say this Pegasus is trying to get one way or another off the map. On a lot of the command cards, you are going to see the destroy objective prioritized. So here on this command card, we have on the red list, destroy objective is there. On the blue list, the destroy objective is there. But even though it is there, so if I pull a combat card for this Warhawk on the Juggernaut deck, this one has the first range zone at 6 inches. So if I measure this out and I go 6 inches, we have the Clint in that radius, but not the destroy objective. And that means this destroy objective won't be targeted because it has to go within 6 inches first, so it's going to pick this Clint right in front of it. So you'll find that sometimes these destroy objectives, even though they're flagged and they're supposed to be prioritized by the Aces, they're going to prioritize range first. So that Clint's going to get picked up in this example. If I zoom out here and I pick a different card for the Juggernaut, this one has a range zone of 24 inches, so it can go out further. So that would bring the destroy objective into play. But this time it's on the yellow command list. So if I pull up the Star Captain again, on card A, the yellow list doesn't have the destroy objective. Its first priority is most armor. That means it's going to pick the Victor over here, which has 7 armor. The Pegasus, I think, only has 2 or 3. Again, there are these situations, even though it's a destroy objective and you may immediately think, okay, they're all going to go after this. That might not be the case. If things are closer to it than the destroy objective, or if that destroy objective just happens to not be on the specific command list that you're using for that card, it might be ignored. And for one final example, let's just talk briefly about indirect fire. So in a situation like this, where now the Warhawk is hidden behind that hill and the destroy objective is moved up a little bit behind this hill, the Warhawk has no line of sight to any unit. So at the beginning of the combat phase, you're going to have to identify this. Okay, that unit has no line of sight to anything on the map, and you're going to pull up the Indirect Attacks Special Order card. And so this is going to tell you to select a spotter. And the very first instruction on this is to find a spotter that has line of sight to the preferred target. Well, what's the preferred target? For that, you have to go back to the combat card for that unit. So I'd pull up this Juggernaut card. Okay, we can go out 24 inches. You're going to hold to those range zones. So even though it can't see anything, you're still looking out 24 inches from its location. And then we're going to go to the yellow command list. We already figured out that's going to pick probably the Victor or the Warhammer. You'd go through the same tiebreaker. I think in this example, it also would be tied. Most armor, most medium damage, lowest TMM. They have the exact same thing. So again, it would be the physically closest, which would be the Victor in this case. So that means it's going to find a spotter that has line of sight to the Victor. Now in our example here, both the Stormcrow and the Victor have that line of sight that it needs. So you continue down the priority list. Has anything used standstill movement, or is it immobile? That's not the case. They both have used ground movement. But obviously it's going to prioritize an immobile or standstill unit as a spotter because it will get a -1 bonus for that movement. Deals the least damage. In this case, the Stormcrow actually does 5 from medium range, which it is right now. And the Loki or Hellbringer deals 4 damage. So it would select the Hellbringer as its spotter in this example. You would repeat that process for any other units that don't have line of sight. And then when you're done, you'll go back to the beginning of the priority list. So you'll use these numbers at the top of the card and you'll just go in normal order. But when you get back to the Warhawk, it will use indirect fire unless that unit has been destroyed in the process. So if the Victor is destroyed before it gets back to the Warhawk, you would repeat that process and you'd see if you could figure out a different target and a different spotter, and then it would attack. It's going to be tougher in that situation because the other units may have already attacked, so the spotting penalty is going to apply to them. But in any case, you would, of course, repeat that process if that unit's been destroyed and can't be attacked anymore. All right, that's it for combat exceptions. I hope this was helpful. It's kind of fun to go through the combat ones sometimes and not have to deal with all the crazy movement filters. But if you have any comments about this, especially about like destroy objectives, what do you think about that? The way it prioritizes those? I've always thought it should be more aggressive, but I kind of get why they do it because they don't want it to just be, well, that thing's dead no matter what, because all the aces are going to prioritize it. But let me know what you think. Thanks for watching.